Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about the airspace system in the US. So the objective of this ground lesson is to understand how the US system works and what requirements need to be met in order to fly in all these different airspaces. So there's 4 types of airspace we'll be focusing on. So the first one will be controlled airspace, uncontrolled, special use, and other. So we're going to get started with controlled airspace. Proper definition of controlled airspace is airspace in which flying IFR requires an IFR flight plan and a clearance. Well, as a VFR pilot, this won't apply to you. So an easier way to remember this would be to know that ATC can monitor the area. So the first controlled airspace we're going to talk about is Class Alpha. It starts at 18,000 feet MSL and goes up to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet. In this airspace, altimeters must be set to 29 or 9 or 2, and you must be on an instrument flight plan. Since I just mentioned that you have to be on an instrument flight plan, VFR pilots are not allowed to fly in this airspace, so we won't have to worry about it. But in order to fly in Class Alpha, you will also need to have radios to talk to ATC, a Mode C transponder, ADS-B out. And if you're going to operate above flight level 240 or 24,000 feet, you need some sort of distance measuring equipment. This could be either just a DME itself or a GPS. All right, the next controlled airspace we're going to talk about is Class Bravo, and this is often seen around the busiest airports in the US. Some examples include San Francisco International, Chicago O'Hare, and Los Angeles International. And usually this airspace starts at the surface and goes up to 10,000 feet MSL. And if we go back to our starting slide, you'll notice that Class B airspace usually resembles an upside-down wedding cake. All right, so next one we're going to talk about is how to identify Class Bravo airspace. So let's pull up a San Francisco terminal area chart. As you can see, these dark blue lines, that indicates there's a Class Bravo. In the lateral dimensions, you can read it by looking at the numbers in each of these sectors. So for this large sector right here, we can see that Class Bravo starts at 4,000 feet MSL and terminates at 10,000 feet. If you look at the center here, we see it starts at the surface and goes up to 10,000 feet. So when you're flying, you just got to pay attention to which sector you're in and try to find out the dimensions. So there's Class Bravo. Or say we want to enter the Class Bravo here. We can call up NorCal Proton 121.3, and when you call up ATC, to establish two-way communication, they must read your call sign back. So let's say your tail number was November 55231. You say NorCal approach November 55221 over Mount Hamilton. We'd like to transition to Class Bravo. And when they reply to you, you must hear your tail number. However, that in itself is not enough to get you into the airspace. You also need a clearance. So you must hear the word cleared into the San Francisco Class Bravo. You will also need a Mode C transponder, ADS-B out. And in terms of pilot certification, you will need a private pilot certificate in order to transition to area. Or if you're a student and you have a Class Bravo endorsement, you're also allowed to fly in Class Bravo. All right, the next airspace we're going to talk about is Class Charlie. And these are found at busy airports, but they're less busy than a Class Bravo. And some examples are, we have San Jose International here and Monterey Regional. And usually the airspace starts at the surface and it goes up to 4,000 feet AGL. And the Class Charlie itself, it has 2 layers. It has a lower layer which extends 5 miles out and that's a wrong dart. That's a 5-mile ring and a 10-mile ring. And then It could also have extensions up to 20 miles out, so nautical miles out, to facilitate instrument approaches. And this last point right here is not going to be a factor for us. We just need to know that in order to go fly through a class Charlie, you need to establish two-way communication, and you'll also need a Mode C transponder and ADS-B required. A clearance is not required. As soon as the local air traffic controller reads back your call sign, you're free to fly through the class Charlie. And if we look at San Jose here, we see there's the 5-mile ring, the 10-mile ring, and then there's the 20-mile extension for your instrument approaches. All right, so we're looking at a Charlie. We have to look for these dark magenta lines. And here's San Jose International, for example. We can see here from the center, it goes from surface to 4,000 feet MSL. Out here, we can see it starts at 3,000 feet MSL and goes up to 6,000. An interesting one we're going to look at is class Charlie for Oakland. Because we have this T up here, which you might be wondering what's going on here. So what this T here means is that the class Charlie terminates when the class Bravo starts. So if you're in this small sector over here, it means that this class Charlie starts at 1,500 feet MSL. But since the class Bravo starts at 2,100 feet, the class Charlie terminates at 2,099 feet. If you're over in this sector, the class Bravo starts at 3,000, so it means you terminate at, class Charlie terminates at 2,999 feet. And over here, where we're still in the class Charlie, it starts at 1,500 feet MSL, and this time it terminates just below 4,000, so 3,999 feet. The next controlled airspace we're going to talk about is class Delta. It's usually found at smaller airports with a control tower. It starts from the surface and goes up to 2,500 feet AGL, and it has a radius of 4 nautical miles. In order to enter the class Delta, you just need to establish two-way communication. You don't need a transponder. All right, now let's talk about identifying class Delta. So these can be identified by looking for the dashed blue circles. We have one for Palo Alto, Moffett Field, San Carlos, and Reed Hillview. And then we can look for the number in the box. If the number itself doesn't have a minus sign, it means the top altitude is included. So all these numbers are indicated in hundreds of feet. So this would be surface to 2,000 feet. And over here let's see here, let's use a better example. Okay, let's just use Moffett Field. So this one is surface to 2, but not including 2,500. And the reason I say not including is because this 25 has a minus in front of it. So in this case, the class Delta will terminate at 2,499 feet. So at this point, I actually want to talk about the difference between a class Delta and a class Charlie. And the big one is the class Charlie, they have radar services. So when you call up ATC in a class Charlie, they'll say radar contact, meaning they have you on radar. Meanwhile, if you go to a class Delta and you call them up, they're going to be looking for you with their binoculars because they don't have a radar. All right, so the next controlled airspace we're going to talk about is class Echo. And this is controlled airspace other than Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta. It fills the gaps between uncontrolled airspace and controlled. And class Echo terminates at 18,000 feet MSL. And then it resumes again above flight level 600. And as a VFR pilot, you do not need to talk to ATC to fly through class Echo. Lastly, we have class Golf airspace. This is uncontrolled airspace. ATC has no jurisdiction over it. You're on your own, basically. So So for now, I'm going to talk about class Echo and Golf and how we're going to identify them on the sectional chart. So we'll look at the Modesto area again. So what you'll notice is there's a magenta vignette. So if you're on the shaded side, so this is the shaded side, this is outside the shaded side. If you're on the shaded side, it means that class Golf only goes up to 700 feet AGL, and above that is class Echo. As you can see over here, everything inside here, class Golf terminates at 700 feet AGL. Now the next one is you'll notice that there's this magenta dashed line. What this means is that controlled airspace begins at the surface. So class Echo starts at the surface. So there is no class Golf here. And now let's take a look at Gustine. There is no vignette around it. There's also no dash line. If none of those are visible, it means that class Golf will class Golf will terminate at 1,200 feet AGL, and class Echo will start. And one interesting example of class Golf, which I was not able to find, is where it actually terminates 14,500 feet. So give me a minute and I'm going to try to look for it. Okay, so here's an example of a blue vignette. So this one's interesting. Anything surrounded by these blue vignettes show that class Golf airspace actually goes up to 14,500 feet. And then class Echo starts. Here's another example. But it's rare that we'll see this. So the next item we're going to cover is the weather minimums to fly through class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Golf. So let's start with class Alpha. There is no weather minimums. You have to fly IFR. For class Bravo, in order to fly VFR, you need to have 3 statute miles visibility, and you have to be able to stay clear of clouds. What that means is your airplane can fly next to the clouds, but no parts of your airplane can be sticking into a cloud. Class Charlie and Delta have the same weather minimums, and a way to remember it is to use the free 152 rule. So what that means is free statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 5,000 feet below. Sorry, I should reemphasize, free statute miles visibility. And you have to be 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below, and you have to be 2,000 feet away from them. So as you can see, here's the free 152. Same applies for class Delta. So for class Echo, the rules change. So if you're below 10,000 feet, you can use the free 152 rule again. But above 10,000 feet, the visibility and this is from clouds change. So at above 10,000 feet MSL, you need 5 statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 1,000 feet below clouds, and you have to be 1 statute mile away from all clouds. And this is mainly because the aircraft above 10,000 feet are flying much faster. Oops, sorry. So class Golf, this is where it gets interesting. And a lot of people struggle with this one. So we're going to have to break class Golf up into 3 sections. So the first one is if you're just simply 1,200 feet or less above the surface. Next one is you are 1,200 feet above the surface, but you're less than 10,000 feet MSL. But if you're above 10,000 feet MSL, that's another section. So let's talk about if you're in class Golf and you're below 1,200 feet AGL. And this is regardless of MSL altitude. So during the day, you only need 1 mile visibility and just stay clear of clouds. But at night, the free 152 rule kicks in. All right, so now let's say you are 1,200 feet above the surface, but you are less than 10,000 feet MSL. During the day, you only need 1 mile visibility, but you need to meet this cloud clearance 1,000 feet above, 5,000 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally. At night, the visibility goes back up to 3 miles with the same cloud clearances. Now, if you're more than 1,200 feet above the surface and you are above 10,000 feet MSL, the 5-1-1-1 rule kicks in. So 5 statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and you got to maintain a 1 statute mile clearance horizontally from the clouds. If you want to reference this chart, you can look at the PHAC, open up the PHAC and go straight to the airspace chapter, and you should be able to find this. Now that we've covered the weather minimums in class alpha for Gulf airspace, we're going to talk about some speed limits. So inside class alpha, which is above 18,000 feet, you are not to exceed Mach 1, which is the sound barrier. Inside class Bravo, you are not to exceed 250 knots indicated. And if you're below any class Bravo shelf, you are not to exceed 200 knots indicated. Oops, sorry. Inside of class Charlie, the speed limit is also 250 knots indicated. If you're below the shelf, it's 200. Within the 4 nautical mile radius of class Delta, your aircraft is not to exceed 200 knots indicated. And for class Echo and Golf, the rules are the same. If you are at an altitude lower than 10,000 feet MSL, you are not to exceed 250 knots indicated. If you're above 10,000 feet MSL, you're not allowed to break the sound barrier, which is the same as class Alpha. And if you're flying through a VFR corridor, which we will cover in a couple of slides, the speed limit is 250 knots indicated. If the safe speed for your operation is greater than the speed limitation, you're allowed to fly at that speed. This rule most likely won't apply to us, but it's just nice to know. All right, the next item we have is the ADS-B requirements. Even though I've mentioned it before, I'm just going to bring it up again. So anywhere a mode C transponder is required, ADS-B is required. If you're flying above or below a class Bravo, if you're flying above or below a class Bravo shelf, you need to have ADS-B. And also, if you're within the 30 nautical mile range of the class Bravo airport, you also need ADS-B along with that mode C transponder. So let me go back to this slide. As you can see, let's actually go to Sky Vector. And this time we'll look at LAX. So you see there's the airport. There's the mode C veil, which says mode C and ADS-B out is required within 30 nautical miles of this airport. You need ADS-B above class Charlie. And if you're above 10,000 feet MSL and 2,500 feet AGL, you will need ADS-B. Okay, so now we're going to go into special use airspace. So in operating in these airspaces, there's special activity taking place that does not usually take place in controlled or uncontrolled airspace. So let's start with prohibited airspace. So as mentioned in the word, it's prohibited. You just cannot fly through it unless there's an emergency. And usually prohibited airspace is established for national security reasons. And some places where you'll find prohibited airspace is Camp David or the White House. And over here is an example of a prohibited airspace. So the P means prohibited and the and there's an identifier. So you can look at this and then look on the edge of your sectional to find out who's controlling that area, and if you do have to go through what the requirements are. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to go through that. So before I go into restricted airspace, over here on the edge of a sectional chart, it shows the number. So the R means restricted. If it has a P, it means prohibited. It will tell you the altitude in which the area is affected, the time of use, which is in local time, and then it tells you the controlling agency. So for restricted airspace, it's very similar to a prohibited airspace, but this area is not always restricted. So this restricted area near Livermore, since I'm familiar with the area, it's only surface to 4,000 feet. So if you fly above it, you're okay. And this airspace isn't always active. And if you happen to be lucky and have the app for flight, what you can do is you can actually tap on the restricted area and it will tell you the dimensions as well as who's in control of the area. All right, so a warning area is an area that contains hidden hazards to non-participating aircraft. And to our right here is an example of a warning area. What you usually find in there is live fire, as well as military operations. So if you happen to want to go for a warning area, you should talk to ATC first, and they'll tell you that if there's any live fire taking place. If there is, you probably shouldn't go through there. And I mentioned that last line is because you are allowed to fly for a warning area, even if ATC tells you not to. At that point, you're on your own. So the next one we're going to talk about is the military operations area. It's similar to a warning area, except there is no live fire. And as a VFR pilot, you are allowed to fly through a MOA without even talking to anyone. Some hazards you'll find inside the MOA are military aircraft, which are much faster, and they're usually flying in excess of 250 knots. One more point, and also if you want to proceed for an MOA and be safe, you should talk to ATC. And if you're already on flight following, you can let them know that you want to proceed for an MOA, and they'll switch you off to the controller in the area, and they'll separate you from the military aircraft. So an alert area is an area which they have high volume of pilot training or unusual aerial activity. So as a VFR pilot, you are allowed to fly through that airspace, except you just got to be very vigilant and just watch out. As we have here, here's an example of Travis Air Force Base. I've been down there once, and oftentimes you'll see large jets in the traffic pattern practicing landings. So just keep an eye out because those guys are flying wider traffic patterns and they're going much faster. So the last special use airspace we're going to cover is controlled firing areas. And this is actually one of the safest special use airspaces. One of the first things you got to realize is that controlled firing areas are not depicted on a sectional chart, as it's not a hazard for aircraft in the area. How the controlled firing area operates is they'll have live fire, but if an aircraft is detected to be flying near the area, all live fire stops until the aircraft leaves the vicinity. All right, the last type of airspace we got to cover is other. So it's not included in controlled, uncontrolled, or special use airspace. So the first one we're going to cover are military training routes. So the hazards associated with this type of airspace is that there's going to be high aircraft flying in excess of 250 knots indicated at low altitudes. So these routes can be flown visually or under instrument flight rules. So as you can see here, it says IR, so it means this route here is going to be flown under instrument flight rules, and down here it says VR, which means it's going to be flown visually. The next number you got to pay attention to is VR, as the 4-digit code or 3-digit code. So if it has 4 digits, it means that there's segments of this route that go below 1,500 feet AGL. All right, the next one is a TFR or temporary flight restriction. These are usually established to protect public figures, or they're established during natural disasters. Also, you can find these near football stadiums or baseball stadiums in order to keep people safe. Usually, you can talk to ATC and they'll clear you through the TFR. However, if you don't talk to ATC and you accidentally burst the TFR, you're likely to be intercepted, or detained for questioning. And depending on the reason for the TFR, the punishments could become more severe. So make sure you do a weather briefing and check when the TFR is active and when it's not active. Parachute jumping areas, as it says its name, is just an area where people are jumping out of aircraft and parachuting down. And the reason for having these symbols is to let pilots know to watch out for skydivers. And for the aircraft that's doing the parachute jump, they are required to broadcast to ATC as well as the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency when the jump is taking place. So something you hear if you're listening to NorCal or the local control you hear is jumpers away in 5 minutes. So I believe this is this is not the last one. This is the second to last airspace we're going to cover is VFR corridors. So these are usually found in Class Bravo airspace. However, in the Class Bravo airspace, there's actually a gap in between. So you can actually fly through that gap, VFR, without talking to ATC. So let's look at an example. So over here, I have the San Diego terminal area chart. So to locate a corridor, you have to notice that there's 2 dimensions mentioned in one sector. So there's one over here. And if you follow this arrow, there's another section down here. So this is a corridor because Class Bravo starts at 1,800 feet and goes up to 3,200 feet. Then there's a gap between 3,200 feet to 6,800 feet where Class Bravo resumes again. So what's going on is it's going from Class Golf to Echo to Bravo to Echo then back to Bravo. So for transit, so if we could look down here, it's saying that Class Bravo starts at the surface, terminates at 3,300 feet, then begins again at 4,700 feet and goes up to 10,000 feet. So let's talk about how we're going to transition this VFR corridor as a VFR pilot. So let's say we're coming from the north and we just want to go as far south as possible. Since we're most likely flying a easterly heading, we need to be at an odd 1,000 plus 500 feet. So let's say we're coming in at 3,500 feet. So we'll be below this Class Bravo shelf. And if you're unsure of how tall the corridor is, just look at the top value of the first dimension and the bottom one of the second. So 3,500 feet will get us through that corridor. 3,500 feet will also get us below this Class Bravo shelf. And then when we come over here, 3,500 feet will also get us between the corridor of 3,300 feet and 4,700 feet. And as we mentioned before, the speed limit for going through these corridors is 200 knots. And what's really cool about a VFR corridor is even though you are technically in Class Bravo airspace, you still don't need to talk to anyone. Okay, so the last special use airspace we're going to cover is a terminal service radar area, also known as a TIRSA. So this airspace is like a Class Charlie, and it's usually found surrounding Class Delta and Echo airports. This area provides radar service just like a Class Charlie airport, but you're not required to talk to them. So here we have an example. There's a TIRSA right here indicated by this dark line. And it's actually called the Palm Springs TIRSA. So if you want to go to the edge of the sectional, you can look them up and they'll tell you the frequencies you can talk to them on. This TIRSA goes from 3,500 feet to 10,000 feet MSL. And it surrounds, there's a Class Delta here, a Class Echo here, and a Golf here, all of which is under this TIRSA. So if you want radar services, you can go call them up on the frequency specified. But if you don't call them up, it's fine too. So now that we've covered all the different airspace in the United States airspace system, I'm going to be showing you guys some ways you can practice so you know your airspace well and know the weather minimums and what is required to operate. So what I like to do is, okay, let me pull up. Let's pull the San Francisco terminal area chart. So if you're with a group of friends one day, what you guys can do is you put your finger on the map and just start going up and start reading out what airspace you're going through and what is required. So let's say, let me grab my annotate function. So let's say we are here over the ocean near Oakland International. So to do my exercise, here's what we would do. So I look and see that the Class Charlie starts from the surface and goes up to when the Class Bravo begins. So in this case, the Class Charlie would terminate at 2,099 feet. Then from there, I see that it's Class Bravo from 2,100 feet to 10,000 feet MSL. Then it's Class Echo from 10,000 to up to but not including 18,000 feet MSL. And then there's Class Alpha. So there's one example of an airspace practice. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a different location. Let's see. All right, so this time I placed us slightly north of Moffett Field and just outside of its Class Delta. So since there's no airspace dimension from the surface, we know that Class Golf is there. And I'm able to identify this because we have this huge magenta vignette surrounding the San Francisco area. And there's more up here. So from looking at that, I'm able to identify that from the surface to 700 feet AGL, it's Class Golf. From 700 feet AGL to 1,500 feet is Class Echo. From 1,500 feet up to 4,000 feet is Class Charlie. From 4,000 feet up to 10,000 feet is Class Bravo. From 10,000 feet up to, but not including 18,000 feet, is Class Echo. And then above that is Class Alpha, which we don't need to go much further. Okay, so this time I'm gonna not only state what airspace we're in, but also I'm going to talk about the equipment requirements as well as weather minimums. So right here, we are in the airspace of Moffett Field. So from surface to, but not including 2,500 feet, MSL is Class Delta. So in order to fly in that airspace, we'll need to establish two-way communication with ATC. And to fly VFR, we need to have 3 miles visibility, be 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally. From 2,500 feet to 4,000 feet MSL, we're now in Class Charlie. In order to fly in Class Charlie, you need to have two-way radio communication as well as a Mode C transponder and ADS-B. And the weather minimums here are 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally away from them. From 4,000 feet up to 10,000 feet, we're now in class Bravo. We not only need two-way communication, we also need a clearance into the class Bravo. And we'll also need a Mode C transponder as well as ADS-B. And I should be saying ADS-B out. Above 10,000 feet up to, but not including 18,000 feet, we're back in class Echo. Since we're above 10,000 feet, we will need ADS-B. And we also need to have higher weather minimums. So in this case, we need 5 miles stat 2 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 1,000 feet below clouds, and we have to avoid clouds by 1 stat 2 mile horizontally. And this is because aircraft are flying faster. And then in class Alpha at 18,000 feet, we can't fly VFR. So I'm not going to continue from there. All right, to conclude this lesson, let's just quickly go over some of the risks of not knowing your airspace. So the first one is you accidentally enter controlled airspace other than Echo without talking to ATC or establishing the two-way communication. And even if you have two-way communication, you accidentally enter a class Bravo without being cleared. Just having two-way communication is not enough. If you don't hear the word cleared and you're getting close to the air, the class Bravo turn away immediately. And when you're operating in busy airspace, there's collision hazards. So always be on the lookout for other aircraft. The worst risk that could happen, or I should say the worst thing that can happen, is if you don't pay attention, you go into a restricted airspace. There will be serious consequences. So let's take a look at some additional resources to help with airspace. So we always have the app ForeFlight on our iPad. If you're not sure what the dimensions for airspace sector is, you can always just tap on it, tap and hold, and it will tell you what's there. And back to this image we had here for weather minimums. You can always reference this from the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, which is also known as the PHAC, and just go straight to the airspace chapter. You'll find this. And overall, I like to emphasize that airspace is one of those topics on your oral that a lot of people have trouble with. So it's very important you take the time to practice. As I demonstrated before, put your finger on the map and just start going up and start reading, saying what airspace you're in, what requirements there are. If you do that over time, you should have your airspace down no problem. And for memorizing the weather minimums in controlled and uncontrolled airspace, just practice writing it out. After you do it a few times, you should have it down no problem.